All right. Come on then.
Let's talk about The Boys, Season 4, Episodes 1 through 3. You're listening to or watching Decoding TV. I'm David Chen here with Patrick Klepek. Patrick, let's talk about overall thoughts. What'd you think of the Season 4 premiere?
Remains to be seen. This is interesting because it's a show that has transitioned to being a biting superhero satire with political elements to being, in many ways, it feels like a copy paste of modern day right-wing Republican politics in a superhero show. And I think there's a difference between those two things. And it's natural for the show to change over time. But I'm not sure where I land on where this show is going anymore, even as I'm thoroughly entertained from episode to episode.
It is enjoyable, I would say, to watch the right-wing media industry being filtered through the twisted lens of the creators of the show, I would say. And so far this season, I think there's a lot of side plots, right? Like that. And I was like, I don't remember there being this many side plots, like people delving into their pasts, um, as in this season. So maybe it was always the case, like that we were like delving into these characters' past, but like it feels like between Frenchie's relationship and Kimiko's traumatic past and Huey's dad having a stroke, like it feels like we're spending a lot of time like on side stuff that's not really the main plot of the show. And that stuff is not bad, but it's not necessarily why I tune into the show. You know what I mean? Like I think the stuff that's most interesting is obviously this big, Homelander's machinations and like how the boys are going to stop them. But having said all that, nobody is doing it like this show. Like
No.
this show is putting stuff on the air that no one else is doing. No one else has the tone of the show, which at times feels unwieldy and all over the place, but like no one else is doing like that. And no one else has like kind of ultra violence and really like pitch dark take on superheroes and corporate media that the boys has. And so therefore it's worth watching just for that reason alone. But that said, yeah, I think I kind of share your mixed notion that like I don't know that these first episodes were like a home run that I'm like, oh, amazing, love the boys. But it's like, oh, the boys is still doing what it's doing, and it's making some interesting choices, and I don't know that all of them are working. So
Yeah, I mean, there was we had when we did our conversation on the bonus pod talking about the finale to season 3 and sort of our general thoughts on where the show was and where potentially it could be going. One thing that we noted about the season 3 finale was that it was a Homelander, killing someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue. Like it was taking the Donald Trump quote of like I could kill somebody on a public street and not lose a single vote. But what was fascinating and what I liked about that was, well, it's not using that exact line. It is trusting the audience to understand the political context that it exists within,
right.
but it should hold the test of time if you were to watch it 10 years from now, because the scene itself will singularly hold power in its own storytelling. Here, it is doing so often, essentially like pop culture, but Republican right-wing talking points. Like the moment I heard like critical soup theory, like I wanted to throw up. Like it feels like it's dating itself by pulling so strongly from current headlines in a way that feels, frankly, it feels a little forced and over. Like it was weird to say the show is over the top, given that the show is always like trying to crank it past 11 and seeing if it could get the dial a little bit higher. But I don't know, it feels less clever and more like, oh yeah, I've heard of those things before, in a way that I don't know, it's just not landing the same for me this time around. And it's not like I have any problem with who the show is like more pointedly pointing out, like you were the bad, like, the very funny thing of so many folks who identify as conservative Republicans, far right, being like, does this show think we're bad? Screw this show. It's been saying that all along, but the show is like just so pointed about it now, specifically because it feels like it's doing very headline grabby stuff, talking points from like modern 2023, 2024 right-wing politicians in a way that it feels like it will age in a certain way and lose a little bit of its luster over time because it is so versed in what are we talking about right now, and then kind of plastering that onto the characters and the stories that are playing out.
I'm going to go ahead and disagree with Patrick Klepek on pretty much everything he just said in that last point. So Patrick is alluding to the fact that a lot of conservatives seem to be waking up to the fact that The Boys is too woke, and that in fact Homelander is the bad guy. What's remarkable to me is the timing of this, because Homelander's always been the bad guy. He literally dated a Nazi in the show, and like loved it, like dedicated his life to a Nazi, you know, in the show, and he's always been evil, right? The Boys season 4 has the lowest audience score on Rotten Tomatoes out of any of the previous seasons, and the conversation online that we've seen anecdotally also seems to match with that notion. The idea that a lot of conservatives are realizing, wait, this is a satire of us. This is actually making fun of us. And so, as a result of that fact that I just said, everything that Patrick Klepek just said is invalid. Because Patrick is saying this show is so clunkily obvious. This show is so out there in terms of what it's trying to communicate. There is no subtlety to the show at all. You got to imagine what it's like for Eric Kripke making a Nazi girlfriend for Homelander named Stormfront, and people still don't get he's the bad guy. Right? Imagine being in that situation where you've created this bad guy, you've had him date this Nazi named Stormfront, and people don't get he's the bad guy. Like, you have got to feel like your next best step is, I have to make this even more obvious. I have to make the parallels so thuddingly obvious that they are undeniable. And that's essentially what he's done this season. And I admire it. I salute it. And not only that, clearly it was necessary. Because otherwise people wouldn't get it. And it finally feels like people have actually gotten it this time. And I don't actually think that's a bad thing. I think it's actually good for them to realize the show was making fun of you the whole time.
If The Boys is viewed as a political object, then sure, I'm with you that it's good that they realized the show was kicking them in the balls the whole time. But I think it is it is beneath the show to be this obvious about what it's trying to say. And for me, it's like, I get it. Like, just go be a good show. And it just feels like that mixture is off for me on this season. Again, even though like the imagery remains like violently spectacular, thoroughly entertaining. Anthony Starr is still like doing just we'll never get an Emmy for work as Homelander. This is just not the show that's ever going to garner that kind of attention. And it will be a tragedy because what he has done over the course of these seasons, it's not a show you watch for like particularly, everyone does a good job. Like, but he's doing the most genuinely interesting acting in the show. And it's just completely overshadowed by the spectacle and the violence and everything else that goes into the aesthetic of the show. So it's like, look, my heart is with you on what you're saying, and it's been very funny. Years from now, I think it'll be very easy to look back on a season like this and be like, it felt it tried too hard to swing that hammer at people in real life at the expense of telling a better story within the context of the show. And that's sort of where I end up on it.
Let me just say one other thing about this before we move on. And I think it's like the show directly references many conspiracy theories from the alt-right. There is a direct reference to Pizzagate in the first 3 episodes, for instance. There is like a kind of Alex Jones type figure becomes one of the 7. The character's name is Firecracker, I believe. And there's a bunch of like really specific references like that. And my guess is like those are some of the things that bother you. It's like, oh, I Patrick clearly see the connection between TruthCon and CPAC, right? Like those are like supposed to be the same things. So I think like part of it is part of what I think is going on, in my opinion, is that real life has become so absurd that somebody trying to provide a hyper real or hyperbolic version of it just doesn't have that much room to go, right?
Agreed.
Like
Agreed.
it just feels like everything in the show just feels like a slightly heightened version of reality, as opposed to what you'd want, which is like an extremely heightened version that's like barely recognizable. But I do think I sympathize with them because yeah, like real life is absurd. Like Homelander is on trial in the show, and this has happened shortly after an ex-president of the United States in real life was just on trial. Of course, this production was done long ago, and so like it's just a coincidence that it's airing at the same time as this trial is fresh in our mind. But it's like yeah, it's beyond parody, and I think that's one of the issues that the show is having. Now, I personally don't think that's a problem because I think like when you look at this in 5-10 years, it is of its time, and that is valuable in my opinion. Like it captures something about our politics right now that is valuable, I think. So I feel a little differently about this than Patrick Klepek, but I think your views are completely valid. Like it's very, very reasonable for you to feel this way. But
I would say I think a part of it sticks out because I'm just not buying the A plot or the B plot or the C plot quite yet in the show. Like that hasn't hooked me, and so I think some of this other stuff is sitting with me longer because I just don't care about Huey's relationship with his mom.
Right.
I don't care about Kimiko's past. I don't really care about Frenchie suddenly deciding like to make a relationship. Like, I have obviously no problem with like who he loves or wants to love. But like I just do not give a shit about these side plots. So I think that's part of it is like I'm just not at this point. What am I grasping onto in this show? The extreme violence, like Homelander's performance. That's about it. Like I'm just finding fewer things to grasp, and I'm hoping as the show goes along, there will be more momentum that ties all this stuff together, and I'll be less stuck on like, oh, I see where they pulled that from. Oh, I see where that pulled from. Because I just think I have less to grasp onto this early in the season.
If there's one takeaway you have from everything Patrick said today, it's that, in his opinion, The Boys is bad now because of woke. That's what I heard. Right, so
get your politics out of The Boys.
Get your
please.
Politics out of The Boys, guys. Come on, what gives? All right, there's one other point I want to mention before we get to a conversation about specifically what happened these first 3 episodes, and that is a lot of people have been wondering whether or not Mother's Milk was recast in this season. And here's the thing,
including me,
for many years,
the first episode.
For many years, people have taken the example of Superman as Clark Kent. You know, he puts on glasses, and people have mocked, they've ridiculed, they've said, everyone would know that that's the same guy. I mean, glasses, who is that going to fool? Meanwhile, Laz Alonso, who plays Mother's Milk in The Boys, lost some weight and shaved. And the entire internet is asking, did they recast this guy? Is that a different human? If you Google The Boys, Mother's Milk, or The Boys, Laz Alonso casting or whatever, there's all these explainers. Hey, is Laz Alonso, did they recast Mother's Milk in season 4 of The Boys? No, they did not. He just got a shave and lost a little bit of weight, and he's the same guy. And so what this whole situation proves is Superman for sure would have been able to fool the entire world with a set of glasses, right? People can't even recognize the same dude after he barely changed his appearance.
I would not. I would argue. I clicked on one of those explainers, David. Me and my wife both fell for it. I would say he looks a little bit. He looks different. I'm happy for him. The explanations he gave for like why he wanted to do it. More power to him. I couldn't be happier for him, and I'm well adjusted 3 episodes in. But that was about a half episode where we had to pause it and go, that sure sounds like him, though. What's going on here?
Anyway, we will just also point out he's doing great in the show as well. Like, love the performance and a great character, and who actually gets quite a bit to do this season. So
yeah.
But I did find that to be pretty amusing, with a little bit of a dark undertone, of like you never know why people are losing weight, whether they're struggling with health reasons or not. So, right. But at the same time, just use your little Amazon X-ray feature, and you can instantly know it's the same guy. That'll clear that right up. All right, let's talk about what actually happened in this season of the show so far. To make this simple, we're going to run down the main storyline plus what's going on with each set of the characters. So the main storyline involves Victoria Newman's ascension to the White House. Victoria is a supe and clearly has grander plans on what she's going to do with the United States. Her running mate, President Singer, is staunchly anti-supe, but also deathly afraid of Victoria Newman because he knows as soon as he takes office, she's just going to have him killed and take over as president. So he recruits the CIA, who in turn recruit the boys led by Marvin, aka Mother's Milk, aka Laz Alonso, with the mission of taking Newman down. Meanwhile, Homelander recruits Sister Sage to the Seven, whose superpower is that she's the smartest person on Earth. Homelander gives her the ability to see her ideas and machinations play out on a grand stage. Sister Sage recruits Firecracker to the Seven, a new supe who's kind of an Alex Jones type conspiracy theorist figure, heavily inspired by Marjorie Taylor Greene in real life. And so together they're going to try to implement Homelander's grand mission for the world, whatever that may be. All right, we got to talk about Sister Sage, Patrick Klepek. Quick shout out for their final scene in episode 3 where they eat an Outback Bloomin' Onion and talk about watching Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen. Which is a great way to bond with a potential romantic interest for sure.
I mean, and don't forget the final bite of that bloomin' onion that was swapped between their mouths before they started to have sex on the couch.
Between Sister Sage and the Deep. Mm. I think the idea and execution of Sister Sage is a real mixed bag. When Homelander shows up to Sister Sage's house, I thought that was really cool. Like, she has all these books everywhere. She doesn't care about the appearance of her house. She doesn't care about, like, basically worldly things. And that makes a lot of sense. If you're the smartest person in the world, you don't necessarily give a shit about what other people care about. And I love that idea. You know, she's kind of like a Dr. Manhattan-esque in terms of her psychology. Like, why do I care about these people? And it doesn't matter what I look like. I have other things that I need to deal with. And her assessment of Homelander and, like, knowing his psychological makeup and all that stuff, that's all very apt and stuff. I think it's a real issue to have a character in your show who is the smartest character in the world, because inevitably, for that character to be interesting, they need to make mistakes or do stupid things, and then it doesn't make sense that they're the smartest character in the world. Or it's going to be something very silly where it's like whenever they make a mistake, it's like, aha, they planned on that, and then it's like, okay. Like, for instance, there is a scene where Sister Sage leads Firecracker to the boys, and she's like, all right, hey, kill these guys, and you're gonna be in the Seven, basically. This is Homelander's test. And then Sister Sage just walks away. It's just like, all right, good luck. And then, of course, Firecracker fails in accomplishing that. Wouldn't Sister Sage have known that Firecracker was going to fail? Like, if she's that smart? And then if she, or the alternative is she knew that Firecracker was going to fail, and then we find out later she knew that Firecracker was going to fail, and that's also very unsatisfying. So, like, I just think whenever you have a character that's the smartest character in the world, it inevitably becomes kind of lame. And I'm worried that it's heading that way. Now, the one thing I'll say is she's clearly on Homelander's side right now, and she's helping Homelander to enact his vision. That said, maybe she has a bigger plan the whole time, which is to take Homelander down. And we're going to find out that's the whole plan. TBD. But I just am very worried about this character being good. And good, and by good, I mean interesting. Patrick Klepek, what do you think about Sister Sage as a concept?
Well, there's a reason I feel like characters like this are often stage left during much of a story, because exactly, you know, Dr. Manhattan.
Because if you think too much, it's like that doesn't really make any sense, right? Yeah,
right, and it allows you to still, like, allow them to be influencing direction off camera, and then they can appear from behind a curtain and explain their grand plan all along. Right. Whereas here, she's one of the primary characters we're seeing in every episode. And the thing about introducing a character of supreme intelligence is that their intelligence is only as smart as the scripts will allow them to be, right? And so you are limited. I'm not calling, like, the writers of the show stupid, but, like, her capacity to be interesting is inherently limited by the screenwriters, like, being as interesting as the smartest person in the world. And so I think that by making her present so often, you are introducing all of those plot questions that you are completely right to ask. And it's interesting because the show so far seems to be playing it straight and not necessarily introducing, like, there are moments where, like, when she has to put on a costume and she's uncomfortable with it, Homelander made her do it. Why didn't she anticipate that? Like, of course he's a PR obsessed. Like, of course you're going to have to put on a costume.
Right.
And it's extremely weak storytelling if the explanation for that is going to be at the end, like, a set of flashbacks that explain, like, all of these, like, weird things she did were actually just setting up for, like, this big moment at the end. That's poor storytelling. It's a cheat because you can sort of get away with whatever you want at the end. And so I like the performance. Like, I like the character. I just wish their presence in the show was constructed differently. I love the idea that Homelander, and it's one of the things I like best about the setup for this season, is his discovery that he has created a bunch of shitty yes men. And he used to like the fact that having a Starlight or somebody else around at least challenged him. He found that interesting.
Right.
And now everyone is just afraid of him, doing whatever he wants, and he finds enjoyment in that, but also there's no match for him. There's no equivalent to him whatsoever. And she at least knocks him down a peg because he's not a particularly smart guy. He's a very impulsive guy. He's a very powerful guy, but he's not that smart. And she exists as, like, a different half of a superhero that he could be. And that has a lot of potential. But I'd say in the first 3 episodes, I haven't seen them capitalizing on that nearly to the degree that I would have hoped. I wish more of the context of Sister Sage was how we first encountered her in that room with the books. Almost like this weird psychic professorial character that Homelander used as someone to go to for advice. I'm not really buying her as much as a kind of a sidekick character. Maybe it'll be better by the end, but
you just ask all these questions. Like, for instance, she had this plan to kill the big Homelander fans, like Marvin's ex-wife's boyfriend, right? Like, you know, and we're gonna stash their bodies at this protest, and they're gonna blame the Starlighters on it, and then instantly, like almost immediately, that plan is completely foiled by A-Train giving the security footage, and it's like, shouldn't she have known that A-Train was going to betray them? You know, if she's that sort, because it's not hard to know. Like, even us as viewers know that A-Train might not be on the Homelander train anymore. You know what I'm saying? Like, so it's like, it's not that hard to know that, like, so it's like, did she not know, or we're gonna find out later she knew, and then she didn't say anything about, you know. Anyway, so
but also the parameters of her intelligence aren't fully defined, right?
Right.
Often when you see characters like this, the way she could work that would introduce natural flaws in her power would be, she's surrounded by books. Okay. She can memorize everything that is available in the vastness of human knowledge and think through that. But often characters are portrayed as complete dipshits when it comes to understanding human psychology and human behavior.
They have low EQ or something like that, right?
Right. Yeah. They cannot read low emotional intelligence, things like that. There's nothing about that. We just don't have a great sense of who, like, she's going out acting like a badass, swagger, fucking the deep. She has an OP power set, at least from our perception, and that makes a fundamentally less interesting character than what if you were to describe to me who she was, how she was introduced, like, ooh, that's interesting. And I haven't found it all that compelling in the episodes so far.
Yeah, I would agree. All right, let's talk about some of the characters. Huey's still working for the boys, trying to make his relationship with Starlighter work, but he needs to contend with a tragedy in the family when his father has a stroke. All of a sudden, his mother shows up after not being in Huey's life for decades. She also has his father's power of attorney. Huey initially hates her, but her explanations for why she left are pretty sympathetic. She was suffering from bad postpartum depression and couldn't be a good mom. Meanwhile, Starlighter is running a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping homeless and at-risk youth. She wants to leave the world of the Seven behind, but decides to reactivate her alter ego after seeing how effective it is at rallying people together. That's something I actually kind of like about this season so far that we haven't talked about, is kind of Starlighter realizing, hey, I don't want to be this symbol. Like, it doesn't capture the full complexity of who I am. But realizing, hey, if you want to win, sometimes you need to do things that you don't want to do. And that's kind of something we see play out in real life. You know, let's just say hypothetically in real life, there's two political parties and one of them is willing to do anything to win and the other one isn't. Which one do you think is going to win? You know, like, similarly, I think it's like, there's this realization of like, hey, when we go low, you go high, or when you go low, we go high. Like, that doesn't necessarily work all the time. And Starlight is clearly having that realization, and I think it's an apt one. Patrick Klepek, am I being unfair? Any thoughts on this?
No, I at least find that interesting. Although I think the turnaround to her discovering that's like happens a little too quickly, and it, that ties into my disappointment with Huey's arc so far in the show, because some of the strongest stuff in season 3 was the relationship between the two of them, which was, as it resolves in season 3, to be like Huey, after trying like Temp V, like to try and be more helpful. He was tired of being saved by his super girlfriend. They end up in a really interesting place as she joins the boys. And my hope was, oh, well, I guess we'll pick up from there. What does it now mean for the two of them to work together with this new understanding of the relationship between the two? And instead, all of a sudden, Huey's, dad has the stroke. And it's just, I find that much less interesting of a story to explore relative to, like, I think when Huey and her are on screen together, like they're complementing each other's story arcs. And I just find where the two of them, I see where she's ended up. I just wish more of it was hand in hand with him, because I think they complement each other very well.
Let's talk about Butcher. Butcher only has months to live because of his use of Compound V from last season. His erratic behavior gets him ejected from the boys, but he still intervenes on missions every now and then, like when he saves the boys in a last-minute fight against Splinter versus Firecracker.
That was great. That sequence was fantastic.
I mean, that sequence is the boys fight two superheroes, the Firecracker plus Splinter, and it takes place in a hotel during a Marvelous Mrs. Maisel themed bat mitzvah. For those who don't know, Marvelous Mrs. Maisel is like one of Prime Video's hit shows. Won like tons of Emmys.
Early in them getting into, we're a streamer, that was like their breakout hit as they became a studio. Yeah,
not even that early. I would say it's like kind of at the midpoint, based on like based off of the life of the service. And so it's pretty hilarious. It was weird to me because it's not for a show that's on anymore. Like, it's not for a show that's like still making new episodes, right? So,
and it could have been anything. Like, it doesn't have to be like
I'm just wondering why they didn't do a Reacher themed bat mitzvah. You know, like that would have been.
They didn't know it was going to be big at the time. That Reacher's like relatively recent, David.
That would have been more synergy for them. But yeah, we do get a bunch of scenes with this character named Splinter, and it is like really grotesque the way he not only transforms into multiple versions of himself, but also eats his own ass. Is the thing that we see.
Pink eye.
The pink eye is what saves them, and it's like who wouldn't do what Splinter does if they had the ability to duplicate themselves? You know,
okay, all right. You know, I'm going to leave Dave out on that island, and you can keep making that point however you feel you need to.
Anyway, beyond that, Butcher is collaborating with his old pal Joe Kessler, played by Jeffrey Dean Morgan, who wants to recruit Homelander's son, or Butcher's stepson, and make him an asset to use against Homelander. So I think Homelander's son is doing a decent job. Like, he's supposed to be like torn between these two worlds, and I think the performance is decent. I think it's at an awkward time in the actor's life, unfortunately. Yeah. Like, his voice seems to be changing and different from scene to scene, and that makes it a little bit awkward just as a performance, but otherwise I like the dynamic and where that's going, you know?
Yeah, I will say because of where the character is situated, it makes the awkwardness of the actor and the like a period of life they're in, like what's happening to their body. At least it's not always taking me out of the scene, because it fits within the awkwardness of the emotional state of the character for them to have trouble speaking, like to their voice to be breaking up. So whether was on purpose or a neat coincidence, I found that to be something that could have been more distracting than it is, because it seems to line up with the characters' shifting allegiances, emotions, and that dynamic is, I hope that remains one of the big hooks of the season, because the idea of like where does it's Ryan as the son, right? Where does he end up? Like, how does Homelander feel as like a drop-in father? Look, I'm not saying I relate to Homelander, but the idea that you just tell a kid what to do and then they just don't want to do it, and you're like, okay, well, I didn't have a plan B, like, is a very relatable feeling as a parent. The difference is he's like a fascistic Nazi that wants to destroy the world, and I would just like my kid to put clean underwear on in the morning. But I'm enjoying like Homelander's ongoing frustrations. Like, I'm doing the right. I got you a milkshake, pal. He's like, I didn't want to kill that guy. Well, fuck you, pal. Like, and he takes the milkshake. Oh, I mean that all that stuff. The scene with Butcher and Ryan when they're playing foosball, I thought was really like one of the strongest emotional points of the first 3 episodes. I hope there's more of that to come, because I think that is, so far of the story presented for this season, is the stuff that I'm most interested in, is this pivot to Ryan was a pawn before. Now, like, he's a person, and like he introduces a really fascinating dynamic that could play out over the arc of the season. That I'm really interested to see what happens.
Yeah, me as well. I will say, I think it's implausible to me that they would use like a non-soup to do these saves. Like,
Yeah.
Ryan's like practicing his first save, and it's like, okay, now you're gonna shove me, and it's like, well, that guy's dead, you know. And I don't know how that guy's gonna die, but he's dead. And then, in fact, what happens is Homelander comes in and intervenes, and that I was actually honestly upset on Ryan's behalf when Homelander comes in, because it's like, oh, this isn't what we agreed on. And then he kills that guy. Coy, I think is his name.
Yeah.
The Asian stunt director,
who's portrayed as just, they spend so much time for a side character who is clearly going to eat it at some point.
Yeah.
Like, but they go out of their way to be like, everyone fucking loves, like, what a guy, like, what a guy. Good dude,
such a
like,
nice guy. Yeah,
so nice, in a show full of,
yeah,
at best complicated, most of the time just assholes. Like, you know what though? Coy. Everybody's like, Coy's coming to the bar tonight. We're like, Coy. Which is probably your first sign that something horrible is going to happen to him, because such characters cannot exist in this world. But I agree. Like, when he appeared there, I mean, I'm
just surprised things don't go wrong all the time, you know. and one thing I think it is like net new information. Patrick, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think like the idea that most saves are staged is,
that's new.
That's new. Like, so, you know, Homelander's like, yeah, sure, some saves happen, you know, for real, but like most of the time it's staged and filmed, and it's like, I'm curious where the show is going with that. That's kind of interesting, right? The idea that like most saves are staged, because there is the speech when they do the Vault on Ice confrontation where they're like, hey, we want there to be a soup managing law enforcement in every city in America. But it's like, why would you want that if they don't actually do any saving? And I guess that's the point. That's the point, is that they are like, is that it is the ultimate elevation of like pure figureheads to positions of authority. Like, they don't actually do anything, but they want to be in charge, right? So,
and I have to imagine, we'll see if the show pulls on this thread, but you know, there's a moment where A-Train retrieves some footage from, I don't know, like the data center of Vought Tower. And there's a moment where when A-Train is explaining one of his saves, and then, his friend comes along, you know, who he was involved with an accident with in the previous season where he lost the use of his legs, explains like, no, this is all fake. They added this stuff in post. Those raw elements probably exist, right? Like, we're shown a scene where they're setting up the save and working amongst blue screens and different stunt stuff. It wouldn't shock me if like one of the revelations that happens at some point this season is the release of like the raw save data that just that it suddenly exposes all of these guys as complete and utter frauds that are just manipulated as celebrities by Vought and are doing very little actual saving themselves. Just seems like they've set up various elements to introduce something like that. Feels like a shoe ready to drop at some point that would expose Homelander all the way down as people who are not actually doing any real superhero saving on the regular.
Yeah. Agreed. Frenchie and Kimiko still going on adventures. I have to say, my memory of Frenchie and Kimiko was that they're romantically involved, but they're not. They're not. Kimiko gives a speech in a previous season where she says, "Hey, what we have, it's better than that. We're clearly like family.
Right?
They're not like romantically involved." But Frenchie now has a love interest named Callin, who he used to spend time with at Narcotics Anonymous. Only it turns out in a big twist, really unfortunate, Frenchie actually killed Callin's entire family while he was an assassin. Meanwhile, Kimiko is... I hate when that happens. Meanwhile, Kimiko is trying to process her past trauma, so she decides to go after Shining Light, a group that killed her parents and kidnapped her and her brother. So I think, these plot lines were fine. Like, the Callin stuff felt extremely abrupt, I have to say. And I think it's safe to say, Patrick, neither you or I are particularly interested in either. We're like, I mean, on some level, I think the Kimiko stuff is good just because the unspeaking Asian character trope is one that has been in many shows. On some level, it's not cool that they like deployed this trope, and I like that, and I think they've actually acknowledged that, if I recall correctly. But like on some level, this plot line is kind of justifying why they did it that way. Like, it's kind of like, hey, there's actually a reason for the trauma. There's a reason why she doesn't talk, and we're going to explore that this season. So it's like, okay, that's fine. Like, I respect that. The Callin stuff is just kind of like comes out of nowhere and feels really abrupt to me. But either way, neither of these are as interesting as kind of the main storyline, in my opinion. So any other thoughts, Patrick?
No, I'm on the same page. It feels like we need to give these characters something to do before like a main thread starts better involving everybody. It feels very much, well, we can't just not have Frenchie and Kimiko in. And actually, you know what? I just go send them off on an adventure, and they can come back in episode 3.
Right?
And it feels like
send them off with little side quests, basically. Yeah.
Right, and it feels like it would be a stronger show as a result. Instead, because it's forcing itself to remain this large ensemble, sometimes there's just not something for these characters to do, and that's okay. In the pecking order of who the boys are in the group, they've always been like lower level, like characters, like interesting and fun and entertaining, but are more useful tools for the storytelling than they are like primary motivators. And here it feels like they've fallen into a trap of, we've got to give them something to do, when I think it's not quite undermining it. It's just sort of boring, and there's not enough here, and it feels like it's spinning plates until they can all come together halfway through the season when we have a motivating factor for everybody involved.
Agreed. All right, a couple of other random odds and ends. We see Black Noir is back. In last season, Homelander ripped Black Noir's guts out, killing him. So it was surprising to see Black Noir is back, but apparently he's now played by an actor who's really struggling to find his motivation. We never see this character's face. So I am curious if it's going to be someone we recognize. I doubt it, though. I think it's just going to be someone, who's an actor playing Black Noir. A-Train is having a lot of second thoughts about being in the Seven, and even takes steps towards betraying Homelander, like giving the boys security footage proving that Starlighters people didn't murder anyone, and saving Huey from Homelander during Vought on Ice show. It's likely his loyalties will be tested as the season goes on. I think that'll be pretty interesting. Speaking of which, Vought on Ice, incredible, like,
terrific,
amazing sequence.
Yeah.
What's great about the Vought on Ice is it just sums up everything. It sums up kind of the mix of like the corporate nature of like modern mega churches, and like how it's all tied in with corporations and capitalism, right? It's like, let's put the Christ back in Christmas, but it's also it's intimately tied in with Vought as a company. It's taking place in the Vought coin arena, which is really amazing. You know what I mean? Like, so all these things, like, it's about how these things are all like intertwined. Christian nationalism, capitalism, corporate figureheads, all these things are connected, and I love that it ties them all together. Beyond that, it's just it's just like a banging song. Plus, the action scene that happens is also really fun, right? With Huey trying to escape Homelander lasering everything. Yeah. Any other thoughts on Vought on Ice? A highlight of the show so far for me, for sure.
Really good scene, especially because it's a bunch of accidental hyperviolence. Is just every time it was happening, as like people are trying to get off the ice rink, and just their blades are just ripping the like just that wouldn't happen, but it's funny anyway, and I'm enjoying it. It's the show kind of at its best when it's being playful with its approach to hyperviolence. I will say we'll see how this bit feels, multiple episodes from now, but I'm really enjoying the Black Noir like approach, which is like they just put a guy in there. He's struggling with motivation. He's constantly being told by everyone, shut the fuck up, like that, Right. Like, but what is there a playlist I could listen to? Like that stuff. I think it's a really funny way of dealing with that character, because obviously they couldn't take the PR hit. How are they going to explain how Black Noir? It's just and it's not even explained. Like the show just goes with it, and there's no setup for it.
There's no one like does the exposition of like, hey, remember that guy we got to play Black Noir? No one says any of that. Yeah.
No, and he doesn't speak for a while until he does speak. Right. And I think when he does speak, it's about asking the Deep or somebody for some. So what was this guy? It was just I'm really enjoying that take on the character so far.
All right, Patrick. Any closing thoughts on The Boys season 4 episodes 1 through 3 before we wrap up today?
I'm entertained. I think I just expect more from a series that I have pretty high standards for in terms of storytelling. And so I'm not out on this season by any means, but I am anxious to see what it has to offer beyond a lot of its really fun aesthetics. Like it's hitting those, like the fight scenes are great. Like
when Homelander like lasers that person in the head out of nowhere,
Wouldn't it have been nice to hear what the next word was? Okay, maybe I am a little petty. Like that's great. Like there are isolated scenes of things that are good to great. I just don't have a solid sense yet of the arc of this season, and I do worry. I had said at the conclusion of our conversation about where season 3 was and how we were thinking about season 4. Oh, maybe this season will feel very confident with a lot of momentum headed towards something. I don't feel that yet, and maybe we'll get there. Mm-hmm. But I'm now a little more worried that this is going to be what can happen, which is like it's the season before the season that matters. And
which is literally what my fear was, right? Yeah.
In which in my hope was like maybe that'll let them make confident storytelling, and what may end up happening is it's just putting pieces in place for the big choices, the big swings to happen in the next season. Remain to be seen what happens, but I would say so far your fears are more likely to be justified than my hope that it would lead to a really confident season 4.
Yeah. I feel like we're simpatico on a lot of this episode because I agree. It does feel like the show's spinning its wheels a little bit, but still enough good stuff to be worth talking about, make it very fun to discuss
it's
here.
It's fun. Like it is always TV, it's always a baseline fun show to watch. And on that point, like they have not lost the inventiveness of their style. And that does go a long way. I just, as a show, I consider one of the more, despite how big it is, I still consider it like one of the more underrated shows on television for what it's trying to say and how it says it. Even if this season I feel is a little clunky. So it's just my expectations are a little bit higher. So I hope we get there.
Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.